Cutting off the supply of Middle East oil. Saudi Arabia temporarily suspends shipments through Bab Al Mandeb Strait after two of its tankers are attacked by Houthi rebels off the coast of Yemen. Will that further fuel regional tensions and lead to higher oil prices? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobbie. Petrol prices could soon be on the way up because of the war in Yemen and sanctions being reimposed on Iran. Saudi Arabia has ordered its oil tankers to stop sailing through the Bab Al Mandeb Strait off the coast of Yemen after two others were attacked. If ships on their way to the Suez Canal and beyond can't use this vital seaway, rerouting all the way around South Africa will add weeks to delivery times and push up the cost of oil and other products. Houthi rebels have been fighting in Yemen for the past 3 years. They're backed by Iran and face a coalition of countries led by major oil producers Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. They also use the Strait of Hormuz to export their oil worldwide. But the gateway to the Gulf is also a hostage to tensions between Washington and Tehran. Iran's leaders have warned they'll shut the strait if the US halts Iranian oil exports. Donald Trump's reimposing sanctions after pulling out of the nuclear deal.
The Americans say they would not allow Iran to export even one drop of oil. Do you think Iran is that weak? What are you thinking? Definitely and certainly, you cannot do such a thing. We will stand up to you. We are men of resistance. The entire Iranian nation will resist.
Major General Qasem Soleimani from Iran's Revolutionary Guard said this on Thursday, quotes, "The Red Sea, which was secure, is no longer secure with the American presence. Trump should know that we are a nation of martyrdom and that we await him." Okay, let's introduce our guests today. Joining us from London is Dr. Mamdouh Salameh, an international oil economist. From Washington, D.C., we have Bassima Alghussein. She's the CEO of Alghussein Global Strategies, a political and business firm with projects in the US and the Middle East. And we also have Mostafa, Khoshcheshm, a political commentator, joining us live from Tehran. Welcome to all of you. Mamdouh Salameh in London first. What are the Houthi rebels trying to achieve here?
They are trying to impact on Saudi oil exports and also to show that they have the upper hand in Yemen. The war in Yemen has been costly for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and the Houthis are trying to show the Saudi Arabia and UAE that continuing the war will not give them any benefit in the future, and it's better to come to the negotiating table. So they are using their attacks on the destroyers of Saudi Arabia and UAE and the tankers to put pressure on the Saudi government.
Bassima in Washington, potentially, what could this do to the oil price?
I think definitely we should expect the oil prices to continue to increase. We've seen under the Trump administration over 4th of July weekend that oil prices the prices at the pump for American citizens were the highest they have been in 4 years. And for whatever reason, the Trump administration allows Mohammed bin Salman and Saudi Arabia to act very aggressively in the region, completely unchecked or, in fact, with U.S. support. As we know, the Houthis are backed by Iran, and Saudi Arabia has blocked this important strait, which raises a question of whether or not Iran will then block the Strait of Hormuz in a retaliatory effort. The Strait of Hormuz is extremely significant because over 20% of the world's entire oil flows through that, and it is the opening from the Persian Gulf out into the sea.
Mostafa, Khoshcheshm in Tehran. So clearly the Houthis are deliberately trying to hit the Saudis where it hurts, i.e. Aramco.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show again. The point is that there have been some misunderstandings in here because Ansarullah of Yemen They have been reiterating since last night that they have targeted warships and not crude vessels, while Saudi officials, including their energy minister, they are insisting that their crude vessels have been targeted. And I have not personally seen any proof or evidence to decide who is telling the truth. But a nation that has been under attack by the Saudis and a number of other nations for the last several years, and 17,000 people have been killed in that country. The country is under siege, and there are many diseases and epidemic diseases in there like cholera, and they are under much pressure. They have every right to defend themselves. One more point, actually, with regard to Major General Qasem Soleimani, there have been some miscodes that started actually from here. And I've seen many reports continuing this report with regard to the Red Sea. He never said that we've done, we are making the US president insecure in there. He said that the United States has done meddling in the Red Sea, like many other regions in the world. And the region, the Red Sea, is now insecure, even for the Americans themselves. So that doesn't mean a threat, actually. That was, stating his assessment of the United States military plans in the Middle East. With regard to Iran, it's no secret that Iran has options available to increase the crude prices. If crude prices rise more than some specific levels, then rallying international support for sanctions would be a very difficult and cumbersome task for Donald Trump and his administration.
Okay,
but
just to pause you there for a second, Mostafa, because I do want to keep on talking to the other two guests. So in 30 seconds, though, would you accept that what has happened, whether it's oil tankers plural or a warship singular, doesn't really matter? Would you accept 2 points? Point number one, the symbolism here is huge. And point number two, arguably it has Iranian fingerprints on it.
I don't believe that Iranians have been involved, not at all, because if Iran means to increase the oil prices through such moves, then it needs to take a very tough and strong and much more powerful action in order to boost prices $10 plus. But such an action by the Ansarullah movement, it could probably increase prices for no more than a few dollars, for maybe $1 or $2, not more, for a very limited short period of time, because many energy consumers would enter the scene in order to ensure the free flow of oil in Bab Al Mandeb. So if Iran wants to play some kind of counter strategy against the US sanctions, then it needs to take a much more powerful action. I don't believe that Iran has been involved.
Mamdouh, Salameh in London, does this mean that Hodeidah becomes even more of a battlefield than it has been to date? Because Hodeidah is crucial to taking the tension out of this conflict because of humanitarian aid and because of trade.
It will indeed. But the most important thing is the Strait of Bab Al Mandeb, through which millions of barrels of oil pass every day in its way to Europe. For Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, to a great extent, most of their oil goes to the Asia-Pacific region, so they can bypass the Strait of Bab Al Mandeb. But for oil destined for the European Union countries, it has to pass through the Bab Al Mandeb. And anyway, any threat to the routes through which the oil tankers go add to the price of oil. It might not be much, but for the time being, it will add $1 or $2. That is not much at a time when prices anyway are going to go up based on the positive fundamentals of the global oil market.
Bassima Alghussein in Washington, Bahrain, the Bahraini authorities are now on record as saying they want immediate global action. What does that mean?
Well, I think that's a very important call from the Bahrainis, but we need to understand that Bahrain is part of the Saudi coalition against the Houthis, first of all. Second of all, we need to understand that the oil prices are an incredibly important domestic political issue in the United States and, of course, in Europe as well. And so while the Saudis and the Emiratis may not be so concerned with the Bab Al Mandeb cross route, that doesn't change the fact that the international community should be extremely concerned. And as you rightly pointed out earlier, the port at Al Hudaydah is extremely important because that is the access point for essentially all goods and services from the sea to reach the Yemeni people, both in items to get out and, as you pointed out, the humanitarian supplies to get in. As we all know, the cholera epidemic in Yemen has reached just absolutely exponential numbers, and it's continuing to grow. And there's really no excuse for it because cholera is something that we do have medical solutions for. And so we continue to see massive amounts of civilian suffering at the hands of the Saudi-led coalition, and they constantly use, Houthi rebels and not wanting weapons to be transferred into Yemen to support the Houthi rebels as an excuse to not allow a number of humanitarian aid to get in. And so I think it is very important for the United States and for Europe to place pressure on Saudi Arabia and on the United Arab Emirates to allow for more humanitarian support there and to pressure them to come to the negotiating table with the Houthi rebels so we don't see this continue to escalate. Because as I pointed out earlier, Iran, if they so choose, could cut off the Strait of Hormuz, which would have extremely detrimental impacts. I think that a total cutoff is unlikely because they also collect tariffs from all ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And so they like some ships passing, but it wouldn't be out of the question to have them temporarily restrict certain exports, which could cause egregious detriment to the United States and European economies, if not the economy worldwide.
Mostafa Khoshcheshm, from your vantage point, what will happen if that call from the Bahrainis for international immediate global help falls on deaf ears and there's no help coming over the horizon?
Well, I do believe much of the statements made by your other guest from Washington is true, that the Yemenis are under a tight siege. There is a catastrophe, a disaster in there, and the international community, especially the UN, should play a major role in resolving this problem through forcing Saudi Arabia and its coalition to stop attacks on the nation and resolve this problem for the sake of humanitarian causes. In the meantime, I believe that Saudi Arabia and its allies are trying to make some kind of propaganda out of this, saying that there is a very immediate hazard and threat to the free flow of energy to parts of the world. Then energy consumers would be surely sensitive and they would come onto the scene to lay pressure on the Houthis or Ansarullah movement in order to, push them back from Hudaydah, and that's what they are doing. I believe much more power is needed to be placed on the Saudis to step back, and so far they and the UAE have failed to, capture Hudaydah port, and there is no reason or sign for us to believe that they could do it in future. But what they are doing is wreaking havoc on the nation. That's what is needed. That's the immediate, necessity.
Mamdouh, is there more than a grain of truth there to what Mostafa is saying, given that Saudi Arabia is oil, despite MBS reinventing the economy allegedly over the next 5 to 10 years, employing Saudis in proper jobs instead of just enjoying the profit margin off a massive oil industry? Why can't they just flip the oil supply from the east of the country to the west? They've got the ships, they've got the infrastructure, they've got the pipelines.
Because the bulk of the installations and terminals for loading the Saudi oil are in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. However, Saudi Arabia has a pipeline, oil pipeline, which can transmit the oil from the east to the Mamdouh port on the Red Sea. And that oil pipeline was built by Iraqi money during the Iraq-Iran war to let Iraqi exports go through and avoid the Strait of Hormuz. The Saudis have expanded that, in fact, doubled its capacity to 4 million barrels, and they are capable in this case of exporting 4 million barrels through that pipeline, thus bypassing the Strait of Bab Al Mandeb and also bypassing in the future the Strait of Hormuz. So the Saudis have managed well with that. At least half of their oil exports will go there. But however, through that pipeline, the exports will have to go to Europe, because remember, most of the Saudi oil exports go to the Asia-Pacific region. So they have to pass the Strait of Hormuz, but they can bypass the Strait of Bab Al Mandeb and go to the Asia-Pacific region. However, for their exports to Europe, they can easily manage through the Red Sea, Suez Canal to Europe. So as for the installations itself and the oil fields, you remember all the oil fields, if not the overwhelming majority of the Saudi oil fields, are located in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. So they can transmit the oil to the Red Sea, but their installations and their terminal will remain all the time in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia.
Bassima, is there a chance that if this incident gets purchased outside the immediate area, the whole situation could get worse before it gets better, because people might use it as a springboard to kind of reinvigorate their standing approach to their relationship, say, with Saudi Arabia? Donald Trump, a couple of months back, he had the big thing saying $12.5 billion worth of a deal with Saudi Arabia. He's got a very specific attitude towards the Crown Prince, and clearly a very specific attitude towards Iran as well.
Exactly. And that is one of my primary concerns, because I think that the Trump administration has allowed the Saudi regime to operate largely unchecked and is using hatred towards Iran in the United States and in Saudi Arabia and in Israel as a political talking point domestically. A lot of the general population doesn't understand the linkages between oil prices and these different straits and points of entry, and how this aggressive behavior by Saudi Arabia is increasing the price of oil down to the consumer level. I think that it's very frustrating to see Donald Trump so supportive of the Saudi Arabian interests, almost to the detriment of the United States. I think it would serve us much better in the United States if he took a slightly more balanced approach, gave credit where credit was due. We already know that Iran was complying with the Iran deal. Despite that, President Trump chose to pull out of it. And it's caused a number of issues. And now, as you know, President Trump has talked about imposing secondary sanctions on countries that operate and do business with Iran, which raises a number of sovereignty issues and also places tension on our relations with those separate nations, including many European traditional allies.
Mostafa, in Tehran, what are the chances as well that this pushes Tehran onto the back foot? And it also pushes Saudi Arabia onto the back foot as well, because they might have to rebalance what they do with their warships that are at sea off the coast of Yemen, and they might literally have to move them down and around the coast. So what they've been doing off that southeastern coast, they'll have to start doing off the southwestern coast.
Well, Iran has been conducting anti-piracy patrols in Bab Al Mandeb by the Navy since 2006, according to international laws. And according to present facts, we know that they have never been involved in Yemen story, or they have never had any problem with the Saudis or others. They have actually rescued thousands of foreign and non-Iranian ships that have come under attack by pirates in that region and all throughout the last 12 years. Iran is not present in there in military terms as regards Yemen, Saudi Arabia problem. The point is that the Saudis have been, supporting terrorist groups across the Middle East. They have been helping Bahrain clamp down on a democracy-seeking movement of the people for the last several years. They waged a war on Yemen, and they have been even threatening a war against Iran. The crown prince and de facto ruler, Mohammed bin Salman, said just months ago that they intend to take the war to Tehran, and then less than a month later, we saw a couple of terrorist attacks by ISIL or Daesh at the Iranian parliament and Imam Khomeini's shrine. And this means that they are only escalating tensions in this region. If the world, especially energy consumers, intend to guarantee the security of supplies, they need to harness Saudi rulers.
Okay, Mostafa, again, I'm going to have to interrupt you, for which I one more time will apologise. I just want to get to your closing thoughts, because we are approaching the end of the programme. Mamdouh Salameh in London. So we're talking about a proxy war here, but there were predictions that this kind of incident was going to happen, predictions going back 12, 15 months. Why is it happening now?
Well, it's by accident it happened, but since the Houthis have achieved some success now of deterring Saudi oil exports through the Bab Al Mandeb Strait, they will be emboldened to do more of that, and that will continue. However, I make a point that the Saudi decision makers should read history. The British Empire refrained from occupying North Yemen and limited itself to South Yemen in Aden, simply because the topography of Yemen. Nobody can suppress Yemen and occupy it and stay there. If that is the case, they should learn that they must cut their losses and leave Yemen, or at least endeavor to reach a peace treaty with the Houthis and leave Yemen alone. In that case, Yemen will not be a threat to Saudi Arabia, nor will Bab Al Mandeb be a threat to oil. There is another point I want to mention, which our colleague from Washington mentioned.
Briefly, please.
I advise Prince Mohammed bin Salman not to invest money in the United States because of the risk of litigation in relation to 9/11. You know that the Congress has agreed a law in 2016 overwhelmingly, which lifts the immunity of governments whose citizens were involved in 9/11. Any case, any single case raised by an American citizen means that the American government will freeze all assets and funds of Saudi Arabia in the United States.
Bassima, you wanted to come in there on that point of the 9/11 people.
Yes, so my colleague in the Middle East is correct in that he says Congress passed that bill. It's called JASTA, the Justice Against State Sponsors Against Terrorism Act. It passed with overwhelming popularity in Congress because of popular support among the American public. However, President Obama vetoed that bill precisely because he understood how detrimental that could put the United States in a position with our Middle Eastern allies. And as we know, some of these governments, including the Saudi Arabian government, the Emirati government, and Qatar, have worked very closely with the United States on at least eradicating state sponsorship of terrorism and cooperating with the United States in trying to identify internal terrorist groups. Of course, there's a lot more work to be done.
Understood.
But that law is not actually active and present on the books.
Mostafa Khoshcheshm in Tehran, in the next 20 seconds, tell me this. Clearly, Donald Trump will not get the Saudis reined in. That's never going to happen. There's nobody to rein in the Iranians. There's plenty of people who would like to bomb Iran. That's a matter of record. So, what are the chances that the Iranians step back from this?
I believe that the Europeans and Americans should act much more wisely when Iran has so many options, including checking Saudi vessels trafficking or moving in the Strait of Hormuz. So
Okay.
the last option, I believe, is that they should hold back their threats, and the Europeans should rush to to provide Iran with its needed guarantees for keeping the nuclear deal. Otherwise, energy prices might skyrocket, and we may experience an oil shock similar to 1973.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thanks to all our guests, Mamdouh Salameh, Bassima Alghussein, and Mostafa Khoshcheshm. And thank you to you for your company. You can see the program again anytime by going to the website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also talk to us on Twitter @AJ Inside Story or @PeterDobbie1. From me, Peter Dobbie, and the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.